The hammer that drove fence posts into Oklahoma clay for 32 years was in his hand when he found the messages planning his murder. Caleb Nash stood in the kitchen of the ranch house he'd built board by board, phone screen glowing in the pre-dawn dark, reading words typed by his wife and the man he'd called brother since they were kids, catching crawdads in the creek behind the elementary school. The plan wasn't just to take the ranch. It was to make sure he didn't survive long enough to fight back. Caleb was 54, lean as baling wire, with hands that could gentle a spooked horse or rebuild a tractor engine without looking at a manual. He'd grown up in a two-room house outside Lawton with a father who drove cattle trucks and a mother who cleaned offices at night. They didn't have much, but his daddy taught him one thing that stuck harder than anything else. A man's word is the only currency that matters when the bank won't lend and the rain won't come. That principle had built everything Caleb owned, and it was the same principle that blinded him to what was happening under his own roof. Ray Garrett had been part of Caleb's life since second grade. They'd shared school lunches, learned to drive on the same county road, got their first jobs together bucking hay for Old Man Hendricks. When Ray's mother died of cancer the summer they turned 19, Caleb sat with him in the hospital hallway for 11 hours without saying much of anything, because some grief doesn't need words. When Caleb's father was killed in a jackknife accident on Interstate 40, Ray showed up at the funeral in his only suit and stood beside him while the pastor read verses neither of them believed anymore. 37 years of friendship. 37 years Caleb would have sworn on anything that Ray was solid. The ranch came slow. Caleb spent 15 years working other people's land, saving every dollar that didn't go to keeping his truck running or his mother fed after his father died. At 28, he bought 40 acres of scrub grass and red dirt that nobody else wanted. Spent the next decade turning it into something, every fence post, every water line, every gate. Built the house himself with lumber he hauled from a salvage yard in Chickasha. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen with windows facing east so he could watch the sun come up while the coffee brewed. By the time he turned 45, the Nash Ranch covered 270 acres with a herd of 200 Black Angus and a reputation for fair dealing that carried weight at every livestock auction from Ardmore to Tulsa. Before we continue, remember that this is still a small channel, and I could really use your support. Please like the video and subscribe. It's free, and it helps more than you know. Cheryl came into his life at a charity rodeo in Duncan when he was 43 and she was 36. Dark hair pulled back in a braid, boots that had seen real work, laugh that made him forget he'd spent most of his adult life alone. She'd grown up in Texas, worked as a veterinary assistant, knew cattle well enough to talk specifics without pretending. They dated for a year. He proposed on the front porch of the ranch house with the kind of nervousness he hadn't felt since he was a teenager. She said yes, without hesitation. The wedding was small. Ray stood as best man. Caleb thought he'd finally gotten everything right. The first 2 years were good. Cheryl handled the ranch books, kept the vaccine schedules, drove into town for feed when the suppliers shorted the delivery. She fit into the life like she'd been made for it. Caleb loved her the way he loved the land, with everything he had, which meant he didn't notice when small things started changing. She stopped asking about his day, started carrying her phone everywhere, even to the barn, began volunteering to make the supply runs alone, trips that used to take 2 hours but now stretched to 4. The trouble with Ray started 3 years into the marriage. He'd been managing a feed store in Anadarko, doing fine, until the owner sold to a chain that cleaned house. Ray lost his job, lost his apartment, showed up at the ranch gate in a truck with a blown head gasket and nowhere else to go. Caleb didn't think twice, gave him the bunkhouse out back, put him on payroll as ranch foreman, trusted him with everything. Ray knew cattle, knew the operation, knew Caleb's methods. Made sense. What didn't make sense, what Caleb missed entirely, was that Ray and Cheryl had known each other before, not casually. They'd dated for 2 years in their 20s, broken up badly, spent a decade avoiding each other. Neither of them mentioned it. And when they ended up living 30 yards apart on the same property, old history found oxygen. The signs were there. Caleb just didn't want to see them. Cheryl laughing at something on her phone and going quiet when he walked in. Ray staying late at the house to go over paperwork that didn't need going over. The two of them standing too close by the barn, stepping apart too fast when Caleb's truck came up the drive. He told himself it was nothing, told himself he was seeing things that weren't there, told himself that trust meant giving people room. He was wrong. It was a Tuesday in September. Caleb had driven to Oklahoma City to meet with a buyer interested in 20 head. The meeting finished early. Buyer got called away, rescheduled for the next day. Caleb figured he'd surprise Cheryl, maybe take her to that diner in Chickasha she liked. He got home around 2 in the afternoon, came in through the side door to avoid tracking mud. Heard voices from the bedroom, not shouting, worse. The low, easy tone of people who'd stopped hiding. He stood in the hallway and listened to his wife tell another man that being near Caleb made her skin crawl. Listened to Ray say they just needed to hold on a little longer. Listened to them talk about him like he was an obstacle, not a person. Caleb's hand went to the knife on his belt, ranch habit, carried for cutting twine and trimming hooves and 100 other things. In that moment, it wasn't for any of those things. But something his father used to say came back. Anger that moves fast ends bad. Anger that thinks wins. He backed out of the house the same way he'd come in, silent, deliberate. Walked to the equipment shed and sat on an overturned bucket until his hands stopped shaking. He didn't confront them, not yet. He needed to know how deep it went. Cheryl had an old tablet she'd stopped using, left it in a drawer in the mudroom under a stack of veterinary supply catalogues. Caleb found it that night after they'd both gone to bed. Took it out to his truck, charged it, opened it, no password. She'd never expected him to look. The messages went back 18 months, plans laid out in detail. Ray had been falsifying invoices, skimming money from cattle sales by underreporting weights, and pocketing the difference. The money went into an account under a Shell LLC registered in Texas. They'd already moved $43,000. The endgame was worse. They planned to force Caleb out using a forged partnership agreement that showed Ray as a 50% owner. If Caleb fought, they'd drag it through court until the legal fees bled him dry. If he didn't fight, they'd buy him out at a fraction of what the ranch was worth. But there was a third option they'd discussed, the one that made Caleb go cold. Ray had written it plain. If he has an accident, we inherit clean and nobody asks questions. Cheryl had replied with 3 words. How soon works. Caleb sat in that truck until the sky went from black to grey. He didn't cry, didn't rage, just sat there and watched the sun come up over land he'd bled for and made a decision. He had to know if they'd moved past planning. 3 days later, Caleb was checking fence line on the north pasture, riding his horse, a 10-year-old quarter horse named Cisco he'd raised from a colt. The saddle felt wrong the second he settled into it. Not broken wrong, sabotaged wrong. He climbed off, ran his hand along the cinch strap. The leather had been cut halfway through, neat and deliberate, left just strong enough to hold until real weight tested it. On a flat trail, it might have held. On the ridge trail, with the 15-foot drop to rocks below, it wouldn't have. Caleb looked at that cut strap and felt the last piece of doubt die. Ray had saddled the horse that morning, said he was helping out. Caleb had thanked him. He didn't say anything, not to Ray, not to Cheryl. Took the saddle to Ed Palmer, the leather worker in Lawton who'd made most of Caleb's tack over the years. Ed looked at the cut and didn't need to be told what it meant. Wrote up a statement describing the damage, signed and dated it, made copies. 1 week later, Caleb drove to Chickasha to pick up a part for the hay baler. Coming back down the county road, the brakes went soft. He pumped the pedal. Nothing. Coasted into the grass embankment doing 40 and came to a stop 20 yards before the curve that dropped into a ravine. He sat there with his heart trying to punch through his ribs and his hands locked on the wheel. Called Roy's Automotive, the only shop he trusted. Roy came out with a flatbed, took one look under the truck and told Caleb the brake line had been cut. Not worn through. Cut, with just enough left to bleed out after a few miles. Roy asked if Caleb wanted to call the sheriff. Caleb said not yet. Asked Roy to document everything, photograph it, write it up. Roy did. That night, Caleb made 3 stops. First stop was an attorney named Phil Brennan, who'd handled his property filings for 20 years. Caleb brought the tablet, the photos, the documentation from Ed and Roy, the falsified invoices he'd quietly pulled from the ranch files, laid it all out. Phil looked at it for a long time without speaking, then said this was attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Said Caleb could have them both arrested tonight if he wanted. Caleb said he wanted something else first. Second stop was the sheriff's office in Duncan. Sheriff Angela Torres had been elected the year before, former state trooper. No tolerance for corruption. Caleb walked in and asked to speak to her directly. She took him into her office and listened while he explained everything, showed her the evidence, told her what he wanted to do. She thought about it, then nodded, said she'd have deputies standing by, plain clothes, no cruisers, told him to be smart and be safe. Third stop was his ranch foreman from 10 years back, Dale McKinnon, who'd retired to a small place outside Marlow. Dale was 68, honest as sun on stone, and still sharp. Caleb asked him to come back for one day, help oversee a gathering. Didn't explain why. Dale said yes, without asking. Then Caleb went home and started organizing the biggest barbecue that county had seen in years. He rented a commercial smoker, bought 200 pounds of brisket and ribs, ordered cases of beer and soda, hired a band that played red dirt country, set up lights in the yard, strung banners like it was the 4th of July, told Cheryl and Ray it was a celebration, thank you to everyone who'd helped build the ranch. They both seemed pleased. Cheryl picked out a new dress. Ray bought a new hat. Caleb invited everyone, neighbors from 10 miles in every direction, the pastor from the Methodist church who'd buried Caleb's father, the livestock auctioneer from Ardmore, the feed suppliers, the vet, the guys who'd helped with the last barn raising, Sheriff Torres and 2 of her deputies, all in civilian clothes, Phil Brennan, Ed Palmer, Roy from the garage, Dale McKinnon, 68 people total. And in the bed of his truck, covered with a tarp, Caleb had a projector and a portable screen. The party started at 6. By 8:30 the yard was full, music playing, people eating and talking and enjoying themselves. Cheryl worked the crowd like she belonged. Ray poured drinks and told jokes and acted like the co-owner he planned to become. Caleb watched them both and felt nothing but a strange, cold clarity. At 9 o'clock, he shut the music off. The conversations died down. People turned toward him, curious. He climbed onto the bed of his truck and spoke without a microphone. Voice carried fine in the open air. I want to thank every one of you for coming tonight. This ranch wouldn't exist without this community. You've been neighbors, friends, and family when I needed it most. And that's why I needed you here tonight. Because what I'm about to show you concerns all of us. He gestured to Dale, who pulled the tarp off the projector. The screen lit up white against the side of the barn. The first image was a photo taken from the tablet. Cheryl and Ray together, close, unmistakably intimate. The crowd went quiet. The second image was a screenshot of messages detailing the money they'd skimmed. Third image, the forged partnership document. Fourth, the message thread discussing Caleb's accident. Fifth, photos of the cut saddle cinch. Sixth, photos of the severed brake line. Seventh, The written statements from Ed and Roy, every piece of evidence blown up, clear, undeniable. Cheryl made a sound like a wounded animal. Ray tried to move toward the truck, but Dale and two neighbors stepped in front of him without a word. Sheriff Torres walked out of the crowd and stood where everyone could see her badge. Caleb kept his voice level. These two people planned to steal this ranch. They stole money, forged documents, and tried twice to kill me so they could take what I built. Everything you're seeing is documented and verified. The law is here, justice is here, and all of you are witnesses. Ray started shouting, calling Caleb a liar, saying it was all fake. Nobody moved to help him. Cheryl stood frozen, mascara running, mouth opening and closing without sound. Sheriff Torres stepped forward. Ray Garrett, Cheryl Nash, you're both under arrest. She read them their rights while two deputies moved in with handcuffs. Ray fought, took 3 men to get him controlled. Cheryl just folded, arms limp, face blank. Caleb watched from the truck bed as they were walked to an unmarked car parked at the edge of the property. The crowd parted to let them through. Nobody said a word. When the car drove away, tail lights disappearing down the county road, the silence held for another minute. Then Caleb climbed down from the truck, walked to the center of the yard and said, "The barbecue's still good. Y'all are welcome to stay." Most people did. They stayed because they didn't know what else to do. They stayed because walking away felt like abandoning him, and they stayed because in a place like that, bearing witness means something. The trial took 14 months. Ray was convicted of fraud, attempted murder and conspiracy. Sentenced to 12 years, Cheryl got 6 for her role in the financial crimes. The prosecutor couldn't prove she'd been directly involved in the physical sabotage, but her messages showed she'd known and encouraged it. That was enough. The divorce was finalized while she was in county jail awaiting sentencing. Caleb kept everything: the ranch, the cattle, the equipment. The court ruled the forged partnership agreement void. The stolen money was recovered and returned. Ray's name was stripped from every document he'd ever touched, but the aftermath wasn't clean. Caleb spent a year waking up at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment he'd missed the signs. Wondering if he'd been stupid or just optimistic, wondering if trust was a flaw he needed to fix. Dale came back full-time. Caleb paid him what he should have been paying all along and gave him a stake in the operation, 10% profit share. No forged documents, all legal, all clear. Ed Palmer got a new contract for all the ranch's leather work. Roy's Garage became the exclusive service provider for every vehicle and piece of equipment Caleb owned. The people who'd helped him, the ones who'd been honest when it mattered, got rewarded. Not out of gratitude, out of recognition that loyalty is rare and worth protecting. Caleb expanded the ranch, bought another 80 acres from a neighbor who was retiring, built a new barn with money he didn't have to hide or justify, took on 2 more hands, young guys who needed work and didn't have records that made him nervous, taught them the same way his father had taught him: work hard, keep your word, don't take what isn't yours. 3 years after the barbecue, Caleb met a woman named Diane at a cattle auction in Ardmore. She was a brand inspector, 49, with short grey hair and the kind of directness that comes from decades of dealing with liars. They talked livestock, then weather, then life. Caleb didn't hide what had happened, told her the whole story over coffee in a diner that smelled like grease and honesty. She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't offer sympathy he didn't want. At the end, she said, "You didn't do anything wrong except believe people when they told you who they were the first time. Most folks don't even get that right." They've been together 2 years now. She lives on her own place 20 miles south, comes to the ranch on weekends, helps with the books, argues with him about fence repair methods. It's not the same as what he had with Cheryl. It's better, built on something that already broke once and got rebuilt stronger. Ray got out of prison 4 months ago. Caleb heard through the grapevine that he's working part-time at a tire shop in Lawton. living in a weekly motel, barely making rent. No family speaks to him. The friends he had before don't return calls. Caleb feels nothing about it. Not satisfaction, not pity, just distance. Cheryl wrote him a letter from prison a year into her sentence. 3 pages of apology, explanation, self-justification. Said Ray had manipulated her, said she'd been weak, said she thought about Caleb every day. Caleb read it once, then burned it in the fire pit behind the barn. Didn't respond, didn't need to. Some roads only go one direction. The ranch is still here. 270 acres, now 350. 200 head of cattle, now 280. The house still faces east. The coffee still brews while the sun comes up. Caleb still drives fence line, checks water, moves cattle, fixes what breaks. And every morning when he steps onto that porch, he knows exactly who built it and who tried to take it and who's still standing. Betrayal doesn't teach you not to trust. It teaches you to trust carefully. And the hardest lesson Caleb learned wasn't that people lie. It's that some people can look you in the eye for 30 years and mean every word until the moment they don't. But if you let that destroy you, they win twice. Once when they betray you, and again when you stop believing anything good is possible. Caleb didn't give them that. He took the hit, stayed on his feet and kept building. That's the only revenge that matters. Not what you take from them, what you refuse to let them take from you.